Yes, another incarnation of the world of Robin Hood, it begs the question of, is there anything left to tell? Ridley Scott reunites with Russell Crowe in this retelling of the classic English tale, and the ancient tale gets epic. First thing that comes to mind with this film is that it takes a very different tack to its predecessors. Firstly, Robin is not an ability, he's an archer in King Richard's army. And secondly, the story is not set when Robin was a thief, it's set before that period. So from the start things have been shaken up, and that's good. The story is fresh and interesting, the approach new. Things are looking up for this retelling of the story. I have to admit I was not expecting much from this film, however thankfully I was disappointed if I was expecting an awful film. This film is rather entertaining. Why? Well, what you get on one level is the expected style of Ridley Scott, desaturated colours, epic cinematography, and a cast of larger-than-life characters. One thing I've heard from fellow critics is the predictable comments on Crowe's accent. Let's get this matter out of the way to begin with. It's just not that bad. At best it's a reasonable attempt, not distracting in the slightest in my opinion. At worst, it's simply from the wrong part of Britain. Crowe made a valiant attempt and was a bit off the mark, it's just not that big a deal. This complaint is really not that interesting, or even that important. What is important is the story that's told. Robin Longstride takes the identity of Locksley, a knight who died in an ambush while transporting the dead king's crown back to London. For Longstride it's a ride home, but soon his responsibilities and honour take over and he finds himself taking the place of Locksley to ensure Locksley's wife can keep her land. This would be a good place to mention how much of the movie is involved with medieval politics. Dull? Funny enough, it's quite involving. The good guys themselves are divided by an inside element, and there's an anarchist versus monarchist thread going on, which must be resolved before they can defeat the invading French forces. The newly crowned King John, being more of a spoilt brat than evil, makes for an interesting semi-bad guy. He's not entirely unlikable, and he makes for a character who's more deeply flawed and childish, as opposed to the usual portrayal of the overly ambitious and downright evil king. Indeed, power is thrust upon him and he doesn't seem entirely comfortable with it. He's not a natural king like Richard the Lionheart, though even he's not exactly an entirely good guy either. Robin himself is also approached from a different angle. He's not nobility, with unquestioning allegiance to the legitimate crown. He's a professional soldier who finds himself bound by honour to make good on a dying man's last request, then finds himself drawn into a conflict. Even Robin's thief activities are only explored briefly, as this is set before he takes on that role. Once you accept these changes, it's an enjoyable movie. The characters are light enough while remaining credible. In particular, Cate Blanchett makes for a very watchable Marion, and there is, contrary to what the BBC critic I heard commenting on this said, there's a good deal of humour. The critic in question said that this movie takes itself very seriously. Now, while it does at certain points during the battles, etc., take on Scott's usual shaky action cam, and isn't filled with hammy jokes, during the rest of the film there are plenty of humorous references to the legend, and the occasional almost groan-inducing line. This film doesn't take itself too seriously at all. It's got far more humour than Gladiator had. While I thought this was a pretty good stab at the Robin Hood legend, I did find a couple of things disappointing, though the worst letdown is how Marion is treated in the final battle, after being built up as such a strong character. This was awful. Cate Blanchett plays a very likeable Marion, and the love story takes its time to build in a credible fashion. There's no instant love here. Scott takes time to show her formidable and admirable strength of character, then seems to mock her in a moment that should have resolved her bravery and strength. It probably bothered me more than it should have done. This aside, Robin Hood is a decent film. Not great, it falls short in some areas, but what I do respect is that it takes on an original approach and it takes time to tell the story. It doesn't rely on action scenes to replace a plot. The battle scenes are impressive enough, though I wish the shaky cam would settle down a bit. This said, it all feels very heavy and amazingly doesn't feel out of scale with how the real thing would be. They're convincing, and they don't feel like they've been shoved through a computer to create. I'm not sure to what degree this film was made practically, but it didn't feel like anything looked out of place. The cinematography is rather good. It all looks stunning, and for once it's not all about explosions and noise. Some may even find it a bit slow, but I say it just takes its time, allowing for a more natural progression of the story. Check out Robin Hood at the cinema, where epics should be seen.